This podcast discusses external research, products, and views not endorsed by CSIRO. Please use your own judgment before relying on it. Visit csiro.au/everyday-AI for more.
CSIRO acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which this podcast was created. We pay our deepest respects to elders past and present, and to First Nations scientists, storytellers, and listeners.
Once upon a time, in a lush green forest, lived a sleepy sloth named Harriet. She was known for her slow movements and peaceful nature.
The words we're listening to were written by a generative AI program.
One day, Harriet met a friendly caterpillar named Bruce. They quickly became friends and decided to go on an adventure together.
I asked it to write me a bedtime story about a sleepy sloth who goes on an adventure.
They journeyed under the ocean, marveling at the sea creatures all around them. Harriet's sleepy eyes widened with wonder as they swam deeper.
Apps like the one I used can create personalized stories using AI.
As they ventured further, they came upon the magnificent dolphin kingdom. The underwater palace shimmered with beauty, drawing them in with its allure.
For example, you can feed in detail about your child's interests, which it will then weave into a personalized story.
Inside the dolphin kingdom, Harriet and Bruce searched for the legendary ruby of Oceania. They dodged dangerous sea creatures in their quest for the precious gem.
These apps use generative AI, which draws on vast amounts of data to detect patterns and make predictions.
With the ruby of Oceania safely in their possession, Harriet and Bruce made their way back home. They had a newfound sense of pride and adventure.
It's a bit of fun, but as you'll hear in this episode, AI and family life has a serious side.
Hello there.
The CSIRO team.
What can I do for you?
The machines in the factories. Producing a computer program.
Temperature is approaching 500 degrees Celsius.
Beautiful. I've answered all your questions.
They can provide an attractive solution to tomorrow's energy needs.
I'm Jon Whittle, an AI expert from CSIRO, Australia's national science agency. And this is Everyday AI, a podcast that looks at how artificial intelligence is changing our daily lives. This season, we'll explore how people are using AI across different life stages, from the cradle to the grave. And most importantly, we lift the lid on how the technology actually works. In this episode, we're looking at family life and parenting. We'll hear about an app that uses AI to analyze baby cries and detect health issues. Then, we'll speak to some experts about the challenges of raising kids in the age of AI, including how to protect their data and privacy. Raising children can be a roller coaster. Between sleepless nights, managing stretched finances and health worries, parenthood throws a lot your way. So we asked, can AI help you manage the chaos? Or is it just another burden? There are AI-powered tools for everything, from planning meals and managing calendars to helping with homework. And, as we heard, there are even AI solutions for the humble bedtime story. But while an AI story generator is a cool idea, there are some things AI just can't replicate. For me, reading bedtime stories was one of my favorite things as a parent. There's something truly special about the human connection formed during this time together. And I've always suspected that what my kids enjoyed most wasn't so much the story, but the quiet moments of undivided attention. As a parent of 2 preteens, I am well aware of the stress parents are under, but at least now my kids can tell me how they're feeling. In those early years of parenthood, trying to understand what your baby needs is a constant guessing game. Are they hungry, tired, or just needing a cuddle? I vividly remember when my kids were younger. One of them would cry every night at precisely 4 a.m. No matter what I tried, nothing seemed to soothe her. Fast forward to today, and there's a company developing technology that might have helped me navigate those sleepless nights.
In the first weeks of life, baby has no control over their cry. They can't determine how loud or how soft they sound, or they can't choose when to cry or when not to cry. It's directly coordinated by the central nervous system. And so what this means is that when there is a condition that impacts that central nervous system, it ultimately causes changing patterns in their cry sounds. And so it's this changing patterns that we end up trying to detect using AI.
This is Charles Onu. He's the founder and CEO of Montreal-based startup Ubenwa Health. Their AI technology deciphers babies' cries to identify potential health concerns, like the signs of neonatal brain injury.
Many experienced doctors come to the point, especially neonatologists, the doctors who care for newborns, they come to the point where they can essentially listen to a baby's cry and tell you that something is wrong with the baby. And so Ubenwa came out of this idea that if there's a pattern that humans learn to detect over time, human doctors, then that means there is something there that machines can also learn to potentially do even better, to standardize this process of essentially medical diagnosis from cry sounds and allow us to put this in the hands of healthcare workers all over the world.
Charles's interest in AI started while he was working as a software engineer in Nigeria, where he witnessed firsthand the challenges healthcare organizations face.
And that was when I first came to realize the scale of the infant mortality problem in Nigeria and how there was such a high rate of newborn deaths, but also many who end up disabled. And it turns out that a lot of these cases were due to just delayed diagnosis. Babies were born in a low-resource hospital before it was realized that where there is no routine tests and assessments and no expert neonatologists there. And so usually before it's realized that there's something going wrong, it's too late for them. And so this sort of started percolating in my head.
While working on his PhD in Canada, Charles noticed how neonatologists could intuitively detect certain health conditions based on a baby's cry. At the time, he was exploring AI's use in speech recognition and keyword detection. He wondered if these two worlds could combine. Could AI be trained to replicate this knowledge of a baby's cry, like the expert neonatologists? Beyond that, could under-resourced hospitals or overworked doctors use it to support diagnosis?
A doctor couldn't tell you today some of this detail as to, I checked for the melody and the pauses and this and that, because it's hard to use the human brain to compute those things. Whereas an AI could tell you that, okay, this is what I looked out for, and this is what helped me to make this prediction, and this is how these two patients are different.
Doctors have been using technology to help them care for patients since the invention of the stethoscope. Now, we couldn't imagine a hospital without computer monitors tracking our vitals. Charles likens AI to the next evolution in a doctor's toolbox. But how does this work?
First of all, to even build the AI, we need to collect annotated data. So we need to have examples of baby cries from normal babies and examples of baby cries from sick babies.
Doctors play a crucial role in this process. They analyze recordings of baby cries, noting any injuries at the time of the recording. Charles's team use this information to train the AI, so it can recognize patterns in the baby's cries.
The first thing we want to analyze is the pitch of the cry. We look at things like the pauses in between cry expirations. We look at things like the melody of the cry. And then next step is then to pass it to something called a classifier or predictor. So you might even have heard this just as a general term in everyday life, where the baby has a high-pitched cry. And there's even a syndrome called the syndrome of the high-pitched cry, the cri du chat syndrome. The sicker a baby is, the higher pitched their cry is. Another thing that this system might identify is with the melody, for instance. We've seen that babies who are sicker tend to have a flat melody type. The melody has to do with sort of the rise and fall of the fundamental frequency of the baby's crying.
The results are encouraging. Ubenwa's AI accurately detected neonatal brain injury in 90% of cases. Early diagnosis of brain injuries is critical for improving outcomes in newborns. This kind of technology could be a valuable tool in that process. Since crying and breathing involve the same parts of the body, their tool is also being used to pick up on potential respiratory problems. And after being trialed on so many babies, they've got a lot of data.
We're able to collect data in Brazil, in Canada, in Nigeria. And so there was always this question about, are babies' cries any different in different countries? We had the data now to run this scientific experiment and to test the scientific hypothesis, And what we found is that the different characteristics of babies' cries are almost perfectly matched across these different countries. And so what that's telling us essentially is that at birth, really the cry is this pure sound that is just directly controlled by internal processes. Baby has no control over it. The environment hasn't impacted the baby yet. Because, I talk like a Nigerian because I was born in Nigeria. And my environment has influenced the way I speak, and that's where accents come from. But babies haven't developed any of that. As one researcher put it, the baby's cry sound is truly a reflection of his inner physiologic state. This is what makes it possible to basically use one model to serve all babies.
Charles's team saw a broader application for this AI, helping new parents. This is where the Nanny AI app comes in. That's Nanny, spelled Nanni. Parents all around the world are using the app to gain insights into their baby's cries. The app allows you to record your baby's cries and analyze them based on the app's global dataset. This analysis aims to match the cries with specific signals that may indicate hunger, pain, or discomfort.
And even today, parents can annotate to say, oh, well, in this time, it wasn't the top reason you matched that was the reason for crying, it was the second one. And we allow them to indicate that in the app so that the AI can take that in and we can use that to retrain the system to make it even more accurate for that purpose.
Charles's team are looking to dive deeper into the world of child development. Could an app be used to track and advise on developmental milestones, for example? They're even exploring the possibility of generating bedtime stories in your child's native language. Which brings us back to the theme of families and storytelling in our digital age.
What we have seen is actually really good examples of families where the generative tools are integrated into, say, storytelling practices, where parents and kids actually work together and they tell a story and they actually generate an image to go with that story. And they might even generate a set of images. So that idea of it being part of the way that imagination is inspired, I think is it's important to see that there are really positive uses of these tools. And I think the idea of being able to conjure an image just from words is a little bit magical.
This is Professor Tama Leaver from Curtin University. He's a leading expert in digital child development and a chief investigator at the Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. Tama says that understanding how AI works is crucial when it comes to safeguarding our privacy and the privacy of our children.
Just thinking about, for example, the push for infant wearables, where with very new babies, there are all sorts of electronic devices where you can basically strap all sorts of monitors and sensors, whether that's in a room, whether that's a smart monitor, or even a wearable that might monitor heart rate and oxygen levels. All of these commercial products that gather data. And often we're actually giving permissions for that data to be housed, aggregated, and used by those companies for commercial purposes. So it's not just a purported safety device, but it's also really high-end datafication in a way that we haven't done to people prior to this period of time. When a company is sold, often one of their biggest assets is that data set that it's gathered.
The rise of AI tools like large language models and chatbots has sparked concerns about online privacy. These tools are trained on massive amounts of data, and sometimes that data can include personal details. This differs from search engines, for example, which are like filing cabinets for websites. They point you in the right direction, but don't store the information themselves. This is significant when it comes to questions around whether we should have a right to be forgotten. In some countries, you can ask online platforms and services to remove your information. But with AI tools, it's not always so simple. Since they learn from all that data, it's difficult to erase specific information. It's like trying to take a single ingredient out of a cake you've already baked. There's no straightforward way to remove it.
What does it mean when averages and aggregates are built on that sort of data? Those are the sort of questions that are quite hard to answer because we don't actually know exactly what will happen, but we know the amount of data being gathered is growing on a daily basis.
When it comes to data, having it used to train a large language model isn't the only risk. The risk of identifying a person from their data in a large language model is actually fairly low. But this isn't the only way that data is being used. When I was growing up, I didn't have to worry about messing up and having that stored online forever. Thank goodness. But things have certainly changed.
That rights landscape where kids have the right to say, I don't want to be recorded and I don't want to have a data trail, and that should be the default, that we don't have a trail unless there's a good reason to, I think is a more productive digital landscape for young people, because it does mean that they can have the freedom to try things out, do things, and not have, something stupid I said at the age of 13 haunt me when I try and get a job at 21.
These days, with AI, data privacy is even trickier for parents to manage.
AI tools allow us to shift away from a written and visual to a more audio interactive space. For a lot of people, that seems to reset their privacy barometer, and they sort of forget that if I'm asking Alexa to do something, that's just the same as typing it in or something else. But that voice assistant in the speaker in the house is often treated as a really different thing from typing something into a tablet even. And I think because we're going to get much more personalized experiences that are much more voice-driven, and because it means that the age at which young people can start interacting with an information landscape through voice, that's a point where we need to be careful about what things young people are actually going to ask and get answers to.
The increased burden on parents in this digital age is something my next guest is very familiar with.
I'm Dr Fae Heaselgrave, and I'm a lecturer and researcher at the University of South Australia. And I have a particular research interest in the impact of digital media technologies on family life.
Faye says keeping an eye on our children's use of AI tools is yet another responsibility for parents to take on.
What digital media does when we look at bringing in the use of specific technologies is it actually increases the amount of that unpaid care work that they do. I was looking at what I described as unpaid digital care work, because currently there is no way from a policy perspective to actually capture, measure and assess how much of that digital care work is being done by parents, because we only look at things like cleaning the house or buying the shopping and providing care to children. But providing care to children has become a much more extensive role than it used to be before we had so much digital technology available to us. So that's what I'm really very focused on exploring and trying to uncover, what then does that mean for modern parenting and specifically modern mothering? How is it different? How is it more challenging? But also, how is it more rewarding? Because, of course, digital technologies can also bring families together when they share use of it. So there's lots of things really that can kind of be unravelled through this exploration of digital media impact in the home. Parents are also mindful that they need to increase their supervision, particularly of older kids, but they've got to make sure that the kids are actually doing the work that they're assigned to do on that device and that they're not playing games or streaming content.
And this is where things get interesting. Social media platforms, for example, use powerful AI algorithms to personalize our feeds. This can be great for finding new content you enjoy, but it's also important to consider the downsides of this technology. To find out more, I spoke with CSIRO research scientist Sarah Bentley.
I'm a social psychologist by training, so what that means is I kind of look at questions of human behavior and experience from a psychological perspective, but particularly from the perspective of group dynamics and how different groups of people, different types of people experience and interact with the world in different ways.
Sarah explains how AI and social media work together.
Artificial intelligence and social media work incredibly well together. The reason for that being that when we're interacting on social media, using social media, we're producing huge amounts of data in terms of what we look at, what our preferences are, what we interact with, what we like viewing, what we like posting, what we like commenting on, and what we like sort of sharing with others. And before artificial intelligence came along, it was too unwieldy, just too much data. Artificial intelligence and its ability to manage, curate, sort through, categorize, and discern patterns and calibrations throughout vast amounts of data means that what you can do when you bring those two things together is you can use all that data to make the social media experience from the human's perspective much more tailored, much more personalized.
From a kind of user experience point of view, what are the positives of that very intense personalization?
Yeah, of course. There are many, many positives. And I think often we don't even notice how incredibly useful these type of social media platforms are becoming for us. Just in terms of making our lives more efficient can be really useful. As I say, just in terms of basic issues around navigating in new cities, ordering an Uber, etc. It feels very personal. It feels like our tech knows us.
And you use this phrase, it feels like our tech knows us, which you used as though it was a positive thing, although it sounds a fairly sinister and scary phrase to me, actually. So there are some drawbacks of this personalization as well. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
At the end of the day, what is that data being used for? So it's being presented in a way that's there to help you out, to guide you, to make your life more productive. Or on social media, it's there to kind of present you with content, news, snippets of information, etc., that's targeted and geared towards your interests. But the level of personalization and targeting of those commercially driven messages and snippets of information does become a little bit questionable in terms of whether or not that's an ethical way of merging marketing drives with people's sort of personal interactions on social media. And that obviously becomes much more contentious and problematic when you're thinking about younger people, people under the age of 18, and obviously social media users are predominantly younger people. You do also get that other interesting phenomena which people talk about in terms of an echo chamber or a hall of mirrors. So what we mean by that is when you're, let's say I'm super interested in cats. I love cats. I want to know all about cats. So I'm constantly on social media interacting with information groups that are related to my particular interests, my feline interests, for instance. That's great. That's perfect. And I'm getting lots of content and news about that. But it just means that my level of interest is becoming narrower and narrower. So that focus can be useful, but at the same time, that lack of diversity, that lack of exposure to a range of content does become problematic. So I think there's questions to be asked about how useful, at what point does it become too limiting to be presented with information that's so personalized, we're actually getting a reduced version of the world.
Yeah, and it's certainly something I worry about, and I've noticed. I get a lot of my news from social media, but I try to watch news from both ends of the political spectrum and then make up my own mind. But it's certainly the case that if I watch news from one end of the political spectrum, the AI algorithms will serve me up more and more content that is aligned with that political way of thinking. And it can actually get to a point where it's quite hard to make it give me something different. And, you know, I'm aware of that and I know how to kind of work around the system. But I guess there are lots of people out there that might accidentally go down a rabbit hole where they're getting served up with one particular kind of content that is reinforcing views on a particular topic, and they're not getting that kind of balanced account anymore that we associated, at least with traditional media.
Yes, absolutely. There's, again, research that shows that level of filtering of information, of targeting of information, particularly in a context of political opinions, for instance, does end up making people more on the side of extremer viewpoints, and purely because they're just not exposed to the range of experience of other people out there.
Obviously, my news example is relatively serious, but not terribly so. But if we've got young people with anxiety problems or mental health issues, for example, that are also getting this kind of narrow content served up, that could lead to a lot more serious risks. Are there any examples that you could talk us through where that kind of thing has happened?
Yeah, for sure. There are examples out there in terms of some really disturbing case studies whereby individuals have ended up going down pathways due to their sort of potentially pre-existing mental health conditions and vulnerabilities, and the social media use has exacerbated those vulnerabilities by feeding them more and more targeted information around sources of distress for them effectively.
In extreme cases, social media echo chambers can become breeding grounds for misinformation and even radicalization. A particularly tragic example of this is the case of Molly Russell, a teenager who took her own life in 2017. Her parents believed social media algorithms played a role, exposing her to a constant stream of content related to self-harm and depression. Molly's story is a stark reminder of the potential consequences of social media algorithms. While there are always multiple factors in a tragedy like this, the repetitive exposure to harmful content raises serious questions about the way AI amplifies certain types of information.
There have been some positive changes brought about due to public awareness raising around the awful tragedies that can occur as a result of that level of a vulnerable human with misaligned social media content. But of course, it's a very emerging area. And despite the research going on in this space, we're not entirely sure of the impact and influence of social media use on adolescents. We know, for instance, in the last decade, that clinical depression rates in adolescents has doubled, and at the same time, social media use has also doubled. Now, that's not necessarily a causal relationship, but there are signs of the risks associated with too much social media use. We know, for instance, that during adolescence, as I say, it's a developing time when someone's identity is emerging in a non-social media space. That developing identity would be constructed in ways with other human beings, where there'd be much more accountability around those sort of interactions. Nowadays, adolescents are developing their sense of self in this global metaverse where they're exposed to huge amounts of social influence, peer group influence, which is on the one hand kind of interesting and exciting, but on the other hand, it's potentially concerning given the lack of accountability, the anonymized nature of social interactions online. And if you look at the stats, then it's very common for young people to be experiencing some quite negative interactions with peers or with unknown others online and not really knowing how to handle those.
There's obviously lots of inappropriate content on social media. There's hate speech, there's cyberbullying. How is that moderated right now by these social media platforms?
Nowadays, we do have a range of AI tools and applications that automatically will be scanning through content posts, etc., to remove hate speech, to remove dangerous content, to remove inappropriate material. That's an ongoing challenge. It's not easy to identify hate speech, for instance. It's relatively easy for humans to do it, but it's really quite hard for artificial intelligence to do it because of the very contextual nature of information. Artificial intelligence can obviously be trained and updated continually to try and keep up on top of these changes, but it's not easy and mistakes are made. So it's always a question of humans working in conjunction with artificial intelligence to get a sense of how best to manage and develop safer and more responsible online platforms that humans can therefore interact with.
I'm a parent. I've got 2 twin daughters, 9 years old. They spend quite a lot of time on social media. They don't have, social media accounts, but they'll certainly sit and flick and watch short videos and potentially all day long if I didn't stop them doing it. So it is something I worry about in terms of what should I be doing as a parent, both to keep them safe online, but also to just keep them sane.
As a parent too, I fully understand how complicated that question is, and it's a delicate kind of path that we tread between trusting our children and giving them autonomy to learn and work within this space and develop their own awareness and knowledge, and at the same time providing guardrails around that to ensure that they are as safe as possible. I think on average, in Australia at least, it's between 2 and 3 hours that adolescents are spending on social media per day. I think in other countries it's higher, possibly about 4 hours. Getting those numbers down definitely would help. I think knowledge is definitely king in this space. So talking to your kids about what social media is, how it works. So educating yourself if necessary in order to have informed discussions with them. In my experience, kids they always push back on that, and they always are rather disdainful about the online social media information session that they just had to endure at school. But actually on a different level, they like it, they absorb it, they take it in, and it provides them with some solidity and information about what they can trust and what they can't trust.
Fae Heaselgrave's research highlights the evolving challenges of keeping up with our children's digital lives. It's no longer just about managing screen time. Today's parents are also increasingly faced with the task of understanding the algorithms that shape what their kids see online. But my favorite insight from the research was that even in a world that can tailor individual experiences based on individual data, togetherness and shared experiences still have an undeniable pull. Streaming services are another example of how AI personalizes our viewing experiences by recommending movies based on what we've watched before. Some people might find this convenient because it makes it easier to choose what to watch, but I know I find it limiting because we often want to watch something that's just a little bit different from everyone else. Tama and Fae both stress that talking to your children about the apps and games they're using is key.
I think general advice, though, and this targeting at myself as much as anyone else, is to be aware and open to emerging technologies, to critique really and weigh up their benefits and what the potential risks might be. So if we're talking about increased use of AI technologies, we see it in learning. It's going to change gaming as well. So how can we as parents know enough about what might be to come and how it could be interacted with by our children? It just comes back again to the conversation and the communication.
While AI can sometimes be a great support in parenting, we should never use it to replace that all-important parent-child connection. I like to go camping with my girls, and the last thing we do at night, when we're all tucked up in the tent, is to make up and tell stories to each other. I would never want AI to do that for me, because it's one of those beautiful human-to-human moments that makes us who we are. I'm Jon Whittle. Thanks for joining me for Everyday AI. Thanks to our guests, Charles Onu, Fae Heaselgrave, Sarah Bentley, and Tama Leaver. Up next, we have a special episode recorded live at South by Southwest in Sydney. Together with our expert guests, we'll explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and mortality.
So this is the thing with digital remains, is not only can they be preserved, they can also be reanimated. And that opens up a really intriguing range of ethical questions.
Everyday AI is a CSIRO series created by me and Nikki Galovich. Alexandra Persley is our supervising producer, and Laura Briley-Newton is our producer and sound engineer from AudioCraft. Script and production support by Jess Hamilton. We'd love to know what you think, so please subscribe to Everyday AI and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you feel like you need to talk to someone, you can call Lifeline on 131114 or visit www.beyondblue.org.au.